Hello, dear friends. You're watching the Ruslan Belov channel, and this is your daily analytical breakdown of the Ukrainian front. Subscribe to the channel and make sure to hit the bell. YouTube systematically suppresses the reach of military analytical channels, and the only reliable way to receive episodes on time is to subscribe with notifications enabled. Before we get into the front lines, a few words on geopolitics. Yesterday, the European Commission made a rather candid statement. In their assessment, the war in Ukraine will last at minimum until 2028. And frankly, I'm forced to agree. It is already entirely clear that there will be no peace deal, no ceasefire in the current year. As for 2027, yes, the odds are slightly better than this year. But even if the Russian army takes Sloviansk, Kramatorsk, the entire Donetsk region, the question of Zaporizhzhia remains open. So I would put the chances of a settlement in 2027 at below 50%. The realistic horizon is 2028. Unpleasant but honest. And now, to the front. Sumy direction. One of our thoughtful subscribers wrote yesterday that the assessments of the Sumy direction on this channel are too cautious. And you know that's hard to argue with. The forested, ravine-cut terrain is not only cover for defenders, it is, first and foremost, an opportunity for those advancing. In the realities of 2026, the Russian army has an objective advantage fighting in the forest. AFU FPV operators are extremely ineffective in dense woodland, and the Ukrainian side simply has fewer infantry. That is exactly why advances through forested terrain proceed more smoothly. We've said it many times, we've been waiting for the entry into the Sumy forest, and here we are, it has arrived. Yesterday, for the first time, the northern grouping confirmed fighting on the approaches and in the vicinity of Ivolzhanskoye. Look at the map. Ivolzhanskoye lies south of Korchakovka, and it is already inside the Sumy forest. If AFU can be driven out of Ivolzhanskoye within the remaining week and a half of May or by early June, the Russian army will have the entire summer plus September, 4 full months, to operate under the cover of green canopy. Where can those 4 months take us? Recall last year, Russian forces from the western grouping took the bulk of the Verkhn'a forest in roughly a month and a half. Here, there is 4 times as much time. Yes, a great deal of work remains. Beyond Ivolzhanskoye, pressure needs to continue on Novosech, Krapovshchina, Kyanitsia, and ideally Pizarivka and Khotin as well to properly secure the flanks. But even an entry from a single axis is already a bridgehead, already a real foundation for expanding the control zone. The arithmetic is straightforward. From Ivolzhanskoye to Radkivka, 5 kilometers through the forest. Covering that distance in 4 months under green cover is entirely feasible. And from Radkivka to Sumy, 7 kilometers. That represents a fundamentally different level of threat. AFU would be forced to urgently pull forces here from other directions. And if, I'll allow this scenario with caution, the entire Sumy forest is occupied by October, Sumy will be, if not encircled, then very close to it. We are watching closely. Now, the concrete results of the past 24 hours. In the Sumy district, Russian army assault groups advanced across 20 sectors by up to 450 meters. In Zapsilia and Kondratovka, clearing operations continue in basements and underground fortifications within structures along the former contact line. Active firefights are ongoing in Ivolzhanskoye and its surroundings. The situation in Kondratovka deserves separate attention. The so-called elite 78th Separate Air Assault Brigade of the AFU is sustaining serious losses there. A telling detail, relatives of servicemen are posting on social media that their loved ones are going missing after evacuation from the front line, that is, already behind the contact line. The picture, apparently, is this. Several combat groups from the 21st Separate Mechanized Brigade of the AFU were eliminated by their own blocking detachments while attempting to surrender. Furthermore, for the purpose of conducting this blocking fire, the Ukrainian side is employing gun crews from the 50th Artillery Brigade of the 14th Army Corps of the AFU. This is no longer a tactical improvisation. It is a symptom of a systemic crisis in command and the moral condition of the troops. Against the backdrop of catastrophic losses in the Sumy region, the AFU command is urgently redeploying the 30th Regiment for the protection of particularly important state facilities of the National Guard of Ukraine to this sector, all the way from Mykolaiv region. The very fact of redeploying a security regiment speaks volumes. There are simply no full-strength combat reserves available. Shostka district, no significant changes along the contact line. No active assault, but that does not mean passivity. Russian army drone operators and artillery worked methodically against previously identified targets. Conditions for the next step are being built steadily. Wadza's Krasnopilia district, assault groups advanced in the area of Ryazan and surrounding terrain by up to 250 meters. CBRN units of the northern grouping conducted TOS heavy flamethrower strikes against positions of the 119th Separate Territorial Defense Brigade in the woodland near the village of Lesno. A TOS system deployed in forest terrain is, it should be said, a rather persuasive argument. Over the past 24 hours, confirmed enemy losses across the northern grouping's area of responsibility exceeded 190 personnel, more than 150 in Sumy region, over 40 in Kharkiv region. Kharkiv direction. On the Kharkiv sector, the northern grouping continues to expand its control zone. Strikes against enemy personnel and equipment concentrations were carried out in the areas of Sosnivka, Varvarivka, Izbitska, Rubizhna, Bohodukiv, Martova and Kamilivka. The defining event of the day, the liberation of Shestarivka. Assault elements of the 82nd Motorized Rifle Regiment, 69th Motorized Rifle Division, 6th Army broke the enemy's determined resistance and expelled the last groups of the 120th Separate Territorial Defense Brigade from the settlement. Simultaneously, Russian assault troops are engaged in fighting in Okremivka and in the woodland of the Vovchansk district. CBRN units conducted TOS strikes against positions of the 72nd Separate Mechanized Brigade of the AFU in the Ternova area. Why does this matter? Look at the map. Lusivka is effectively tied to Shestarivka as a single defensive node. It is now next in line. The Sosnovy Bor area is also in the same vicinity. Where will the advance go next? South toward Buhaivka or east toward Veliki? In all likelihood, pressure will be applied in both directions. But strategically, to reliably protect Vovchansk from AFU's periodic attempts to re-enter, movement toward Veliki is the critical priority, both from Vovchansk itself to the south and from this newly liberated sector. An additional task remains: the woodland between Staritsia and the Siversky Donets River. As long as it remains a grey zone, the enemy groups entrenched there constrain the possibilities for further advance. Hranov, Russian army assault groups advanced by up to 200 meters yesterday. Modest but methodical. This is exactly what the work of dislodging an enemy from built-up areas looks like, where every structure becomes an independent defensive strongpoint. Says Liptsi direction, the enemy undertook no active operations. Russian army artillery and drone operators worked against previously identified positions. The relative quiet here is most likely temporary. Veliki Burluk direction, here the result is notable. Northern grouping units advanced across 3 separate sectors, in the area of the village of Budaki and in the woodland of Kupiansk district, a combined advance of up to 1,100 meters in 24 hours. This is no longer a tactical positional adjustment. This is a significant territorial shift that warrants close attention. I am confident that in the near future, possibly even today, the northern grouping will announce the liberation of another settlement in this area. We are watching Kramatorsk direction. Here I will show the Ukrainian map. Russian mappers have not yet updated their displays to reflect the latest advances, but Deep State has already recorded them. As usual, in grey, not red. A reminder, by their own classification, the grey zone denotes an area of Russian forces penetration. And look at what they have drawn. It was like this. Now it looks like this. 3 key developments. First, an advance along the road from the south toward Ry-Oleksandrivka. Second, and arguably the most significant, seizure of a ravine and a push to the eastern outskirts of Malinivka, including entry into its eastern edge. Third, an expansion of the control zone on the eastern approaches to Tikhonivka. Malinivka and Tikhonivka are critically important positions. If Russian forces can consolidate and take both settlements, this becomes a serious bridgehead beyond the Siversky Donets-Donbass Canal, from which pressure can be applied further toward Kramatorsk. I still do not believe the main thrust against Kramatorsk will come from the east. The fortifications there are formidable, extensively reinforced with concrete, an extremely difficult sector. But the objective, to tie down AFU forces and compel them to hold troops here, is being accomplished. And who knows, sometimes fortified lines break precisely where no one expects them to. Zaporizhzhia direction, Juliaipolska and Verkhn'a Tersa. The final section of today's frontline overview, and it comes with not one but two significant developments from the eastern grouping sector. First, Juliaipolska. Yesterday toward the evening, geolocation footage arrived confirming the entry of Russian troops into the settlement. Nothing has yet been marked on the maps, but the footage is unambiguous. Russian forces have established a foothold on Gagarin Street. Fighting for the settlement is ongoing. Second, and this is the bigger news, Verkhn'a Tersa has been fully taken. Objective control footage and photographs have come in confirming that the eastern grouping has completely seized the settlement and provided combat footage from the fighting there. As we reported yesterday, that official confirmation was only a matter of time. It has now arrived. Verkhn'a Tersa is under Russian army control. This matters beyond the settlement itself. The fall of Verkhn'a Tersa shifts the geometry of this entire defensive line. Next in sequence are Vozdvizhenka and Rozdvianka. I expect we will be seeing objective control footage from both of those locations before long. The pattern here is consistent, and the momentum on this axis is real. I will acknowledge, this entire defensive line in the Vozdvizhenka, Verkhn'a Tersa, Juliaipolska area has been among the toughest to crack. The enemy held on stubbornly, but step by step, methodically, the Russian army is dismantling it. And today's confirmation of Verkhn'a Tersa is the clearest evidence yet that this line is being broken for good. Geopolitical bloc, the EU, Zelensky, and the corruption scandal. And finally, a story that isn't about the front lines, but is very much about the war's political backdrop. Germany's Die Zeit has reported that within the European Union, there are now explicit demands for President Zelensky to launch a genuine investigation into the corruption scandal currently shaking Ukraine, and that Kiev's EU membership prospects are being directly tied to how that investigation unfolds. The framing coming from Brussels is pointed. If Ukraine wants to preserve its path toward EU accession, it needs to demonstrate, through the rule of law, exactly how high up the state hierarchy this scandal reaches. That is a significant statement. It is not a vague expression of concern. It is a conditionality argument, the kind the EU deploys when it wants to signal that patience has limits. What makes this particularly uncomfortable for Kiev is the timing. Ukraine is simultaneously asking Europe for continued military and financial support, negotiating the terms of reconstruction funding, and pursuing the formal accession process, all while this scandal sits unresolved at the center of the picture. The EU has historically tolerated a great deal from candidate countries in the name of geopolitical solidarity, but the political calculus inside Brussels is shifting. With European electorates growing more attentive to where their money goes, member state governments are under greater pressure to attach conditions rather than write blank checks. Whether Zelensky moves to conduct a credible investigation, one that follows the chain of accountability wherever it leads, including into senior government circles, or whether this gets managed and contained as a political problem rather than addressed as a legal one, will say a great deal about where Ukraine's institutions actually stand. The EU is watching, and so, for that matter, is everyone else. Geopolitical sidebar, Trump, the Strait of Hormuz, and the EU-Russia standoff on the Hormuz front, the situation remains in a fragile holding pattern. Trump has paused the US effort to escort vessels through the Strait of Hormuz in order to finalize a deal with Tehran, while maintaining the American naval blockade of Iranian ports. Iran has confirmed it is reviewing Washington's latest peace proposal, with Pakistan serving as the intermediary in ongoing talks. Crude oil has dipped below $100 per barrel on signals that negotiations are in their final stages. Markets are pricing in a resolution, though one has yet to materialize. The economic damage from weeks of disrupted transit through the world's most critical energy choke point has already been considerable. NPR plus 2. On the EU-Russia axis, the confrontational rhetoric is hardening. On May 20th, Russia's Federation Council approved legislation authorizing the use of Russian armed forces to protect Russian citizens abroad. A law analysts read as a deliberate signal to Western governments that Moscow is prepared to escalate beyond Ukraine's borders if it deems the situation demands it. Meanwhile, the European Union continues to expand imports of Russian liquefied natural gas, despite its stated commitment to phase them out by 2027, a contradiction that undermines Brussels' own sanctions architecture and raises serious questions about the bloc's strategic coherence. That covers today's full overview. If you found this episode useful, leave a like. It is direct support for the channel in its ongoing fight against the algorithms. See you in the next episode.